Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Wow, I think this is a record attendance for a town hall. And it's understandable why. I hope you were all able to see some of the interactive displays in the foyer before you came in on some of the exciting things that are going on as a part of the integrated strategic planning process. We're really excited about this planning process that now is about a year in the making. It's been such a privilege and an honor to work with David Entwistle, with Chris Dawes, and now Dennis Lund, really to come together to form an integrated strategic plan for Stanford Medicine. And we've heard from many of you, hundreds on the various committees that have informed the strategic plan. And now, moving forward, we really look to you for engagement, feedback, and involvement in the execution of the plan and in the continual refinement of the plan. Since we know no strategic plan is really ever completed, it's always an evolution. So we listened a lot, and we'll continue to listen a lot. And the 5 important words that describe our strategic plan are at the top of this slide: human-centered and discovery-led. Human-centered because ultimately everything we do, from our basic research, our translational research, the care we deliver, the care pathways we seek to improve, everything is ultimately about the human condition. And discovery-led because we know that our ability to impact the human condition is very much informed by discovery, especially here at Stanford. And then there are 3 key themes under the heading of human-centered and discovery-led: value-focused, digitally driven, and uniquely Stanford. And we'll be talking more about those in the course of the year to come, about what they mean, about how you can be involved in each of those areas. Now, as we move forward, under each of these 3 verticals, we identified some areas of focus, next steps, if you will. And the areas that are highlighted in cardinal on this slide are the areas that involve and cut across all 3 entities: Stanford Healthcare, Lucile Packard Children's Hospital, Stanford, and the Stanford School of Medicine. And as you can see, most areas do cut across all 3 entities. Not all. And one of the things that we've reinforced throughout the strategic planning process is that the formation of an integrated plan doesn't mean that each organization is going to march in lockstep to any overall integrated plan. Each organization has its own distinct needs, has its own distinct structures, and we want to respect that. We have, I think, throughout the planning process, and as we execute on the plan, we want to respect it as well. For example, we know that, and we just had a wonderful retreat of the Lucile Packard Foundation for Children's Health, the organization that raises money to support the Children's Hospital as well as to support pediatric and obstetrical programs in the School of Medicine. We had a wonderful retreat last Friday of the board and the leadership of the foundation, and we talked about the importance of rebuilding our facilities in maternal and neonatal health in the Packard Children's Hospital. So that's what is depicted under Uniquely Stanford Johnson Center Strategic Refresh. In other words, where have we been? In so many ways, we've led the field of neonatology. We want to make sure we're doing that in the future, and we want to plan the facilities and the programs that will enable us to do it in the future. So that's distinctively an area of focus for the Children's Hospital, for the School of Medicine. And likewise, you can see there are other areas that are going to be distinct to 1 or 2, but not necessarily all 3 of the entities, and that's fine. That's what we wanted this plan to do. We wanted to recognize the areas where we can come together, and as you can see, in most areas we do come together, all 3 entities. But we wanted also to affirm and respect that there are going to be individual initiatives within each of the 3 organizations that for sure have to continue in a vibrant and vital way moving forward. So those are the verticals and the programs underneath each of the verticals. You'll be hearing more about how you can be involved in those moving forward. Finally, before turning it over to David and to Denny, I wanted to announce an award that we're very excited about, and we need your input because each and every one of you has the opportunity to nominate a colleague for this award. In fact, we're going to give 2 each year. We call it the Integrated Strategic Plan Star Award. We want to recognize people in our community who have contributed transformative ideas and engagement to making the Integrated Strategic Plan a success. I've given the web address there for the Integrated Strategic Planning website. Please log on. There you'll see instructions for nominating a colleague. Anyone at Stanford is eligible to be nominated. Anyone working with or studying in a part of any enterprise that's a part of Stanford Medicine is eligible for this award. So log on, look at the description of the program, think about your colleagues, and please nominate your colleagues. For one thing, your nomination enables us to know about the great work that's going on by the people in the entities of Stanford Medicine and will enable us ultimately to recognize and to affirm the importance of all those endeavors. So I next want to turn the podium over to my colleagues that I work with every day and feel so pleased and honored to work with. David Entwistle, the President and CEO of Stanford Healthcare, and Dennis Lund, the Interim President and CEO of Lucile Packard Children's Hospital and Stanford Children's Health. And they're here today to interview and to talk with a very, very special person. I'll let Denny introduce that person and how he has been so pivotal in being involved with us here at Stanford. I think you're going to find the story and the intent to be very inspiring. Thanks for being here, and Denny and David, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lloyd. I'm delighted to introduce Matt Wilsey to us today. Matt understands, he and his wife, Kristen, really understand the impact of numbers in medical research. While the logic of medical research to support cures for large numbers of patients is very sound, what do you do if your child is one of only 36 who are diagnosed with a certain condition? Matt, will you please come up and join us? Thanks. It's good to sit down. So, Matt and his wife, Kristen, have been facing a challenge since their daughter, Grace, was born about 9 years ago. Grace inherited a condition where the NGLY1 gene doesn't produce enough of a particular enzyme that plays a crucial role in key biochemical processes. The deficiency is associated with movement disorders, delayed growth, seizures, and potentially liver problems. So instead of waiting for science to produce an answer, the Wilseys willed it forward. They worked with Stanford Medicine and others to create hope for their daughter and dozens of others as well as initiating a new model for biomedical research. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much.
So first of all, I know Kristen's not here today, so I suspect she and Grace are off doing something.
Yes.
How's Grace doing?
Well, it's definitely a tag team approach because she's meeting with Doug Seidel actually right now. So it's basically a full-time job for both of us. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I sold my last company to Twitter, and this is my full-time job, as is Kristen's. I handle most of the science, and she handles more of the day-to-day care and all the doctors. So it really is a global effort. And Grace is happy. She's stable. We feel very fortunate that she's on the higher end of the spectrum of this disorder. It is pretty terrible. NGLY1 is in every cell in the body, and it primarily affects the central nervous system. We're not sure what the lifespan is. We know of 6 patients who have died from the condition. Thankfully, only 1 after diagnosis, so we have a pretty good track record of keeping these kids stable.
So can you tell us a little bit about the unique business-like approach that led to the identification of the NGLY1 deficiency and how Packard was involved in that?
Yeah, I guess I'll start maybe with the second part about Packard's importance. Grace arrived, she was full term, and it was a crash C-section at Stanford. And, it's hard to kind of relive it, but it was a scene straight out of, ER or any of those medical shows where we went in for non-reassuring heart rate, and the team said, we have to get the baby out now. And it was controlled chaos. It was doctors and nurses running everywhere. I was left to sit outside the operating room and essentially pray that our baby and Kristen would pull through. And they did, I think, in large part thanks to the team. I think if we had been living somewhere else, that we would not have had such a good outcome. And Grace went to the Well Baby Nursery, so we got to see the Packard side from top to bottom. And I knew right away that something was wrong. So it's, I guess, parent intuition, which is something for all of you to keep in mind, is that parents have a great sense of what's going on, even if they don't have a medical degree. And I called the hospitalist over and I said, something's wrong. And he said, no, she's fine. It was just the stress of the arrival. And we quickly realized that it was something global. It was genetic. And a friend said, you need to meet Greg Enns. And Greg became our de facto pediatrician and worked his tail off with his genetic counselor, Julia Platt, to find a diagnosis. And we did every test known to man for 3 years. And I finally went into Greg's office and I said, I want to do whole genome sequencing. And Greg was very kind. He sort of said, well, that's not really done. This was 6 years ago, keep in mind. But he then led us to Mike Snyder. And I think kind of the business model approach is that we take a really flat system. We don't want a lot of hierarchy. We want it to be nimble. We want it to be collaborative. Again, from my background as a tech entrepreneur, and Stanford really had that in its DNA as well. And so it was a sort of a symbiotic relationship built on trust and collaboration and really faith in both sides of the equation.
So how important was it for you and your wife to just have a diagnosis, have a
Yeah, there's probably a lot of students here, right? And when Grace's case, we call it the diagnostic odyssey, especially in rare diseases. When she was going through that, our case was presented to the medical school, and a lot of students, one in particular, raised their hand and said, why does it matter? You can't really do anything about this disease. And it matters a great deal as a parent, and unless you're in that situation with a child with an unknown disease, you can't really relate or understand the relief that comes from knowing the enemy. You really want to know what may kill your child. And most parents stop right there, and it's understandable. It's such a relief to sort of say, okay, as opposed to fighting a guerrilla warfare, you don't know where shots are coming from. You want to see the enemy head on. You want like World War I battlefield. And really what you can do with that information beyond the relief is you can look for over-the-counter drugs that might help, or repurposing drugs. You can find connections with other diseases, more common diseases that could really help millions of people, which is what we've found. And then the third thing is you can prepare to expand your family via IVF or other means. And so it really does have great value to families.
So I've been a physician for almost 40 years now, and physicians are not always the most receptive to suggestions, especially from patients. So how was it working with physicians at Stanford and as you were trying to push this agenda and try to get a diagnosis and a treatment for your daughter?
It is true. We have run across some of those doctors, but it's a dying breed, honestly. There's a new world order. And I would say, doctors here, specifically for us, led by Greg Enns, but Dorsey Bass and others, who we would go in and we would brainstorm together on what's the next step. What are we going to pursue next? And I would say that on our team, at least from our research team, we have 1 Nobel laureate, we have 6 Breakthrough Prize winners, we have 1 Lasker Award winner, and people are just very, very receptive. And a funny story is a good friend of mine has a son with cystic fibrosis, and he sent me an article. He said, hey, have you heard of Jennifer Doudna? And I said, nope, haven't heard of her. And it just kind of shows you how naive and a little bit dumb I am. But I Googled her, and I was like, well, I know CRISPR. I mean, CRISPR we're using in multiple labs. And so I cold emailed her. And a few days later, we had a meeting. And she was so kind and wonderful and helpful. And that is really a perfect example. But I think that the team at Stanford is definitely was ahead of the wave on this receptivity and working together with patients.
That's
You know,
great.
kind of along that line, what I love is you didn't stop with a diagnosis. That you said that you and your wife said we're going to do something more to help others with this deficiency, and in fact went on to form your own not-for-profit. And I'd love to just share a little bit about what has the Grace Science Foundation been able to do. What's your progress to date?
Yeah, so far we've raised a little north of $8 million. That's gone, about a third of it's gone to Stanford. And we almost think of it as an hourglass. So we started very wide, threw a lot of things against the wall, see what would stick. And then we refine it and we come back and then we expand again. And right now we're sort of in that refine phase where we're doubling and tripling down at a couple of key centers, one of which is Stanford. So all in, we have about 150 scientists in 6 countries working on the disease now. And what's unique is that they're all different specialties, and they're working together. So, for example, Mike Snyder here might be working with Shinya Yamanaka in Japan on iPSCs and differentiating into neurons and how we can use that for high-throughput screening. It just does not happen very often in science and medicine. The other key thing is that, for those of you that know Carolyn Bertozzi, who moved over from Berkeley, her team discovered that if you inhibit NGLY1, it's actually a therapy for cancer. So none of this would have been possible without the discovery of the rare disease and the investment into the basic research around it.
Fantastic. You know, one of the things that we got really excited about is when you talk about genomics, the fact is that we've been able to collect a huge amount of data. And in fact, a lot of that data goes toward, in essence, diagnosing what has been undiagnosable. And so one of the exciting things is what you've actually been able to do, and actually with Stanford Medicine. Maybe you could describe a little about what you've done with the Biobank.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so every year we invite all of our global team to Palo Alto for a meeting. And in 2017, we asked the families to come join. And some of these families had never been on an airplane before, let alone leave their country. And so it was pretty, it was a bit of a culture shock to land in Palo Alto. And we had difficulty getting cells out of NIH, quite honestly. It was a battle. And so we said, we don't want any roadblocks or friction in our drive to cure this. And we want the scientists at Stanford and elsewhere to have the tools that they need. So we approached CTRU and Rohit Gupta and his team about doing this. And they mobilized and collected urine, blood, stool, skin, saliva on 61 individuals. That included patients, parents, and healthy siblings. And to basically collect and catalog and store an entire disease in 3-4 days was really remarkable. And I would say that we want A+ people and A+ scientists. And, or I'd rather take a B- scientist and an A+ person. That's as opposed to vice versa. And the CTRU team is definitely A+. And I would also add that the Stanford IRB probably does not hear this often, but it was one of the best experiences that we've had in 9 years in medicine. I mean, it really was amazing. So I know the IRB folks don't get a lot of shout outs, so I'm happy to give it.
I love that. We always appreciate the shout outs, especially the team. You know, is your, in essence, part of what we're looking at in what you've done here and the work that has actually progressed, you're actually talking about actually influencing other countless diseases that are actually ultimately, even though there may not be a cure for this, but what does this work do to add to the others and the work and the basis of that? What's kind of your ultimate goal as you look at the work that you've done today?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we want to cure NGLY1 deficiency. But we really do believe that the discoveries we make along the way will unlock more common indications. And we've seen that with the Bertozzi lab in multiple myeloma. We're starting to see connections with NGLY1 and Parkinson's. So we could spend another $1 billion trying to cure Parkinson's, or we could spend a few million looking for the back door. And these rare diseases, especially the ones that affect the CNS, are the Rosetta Stone. And industry is starting to wake up to this, which is great. And there's some ways that industry can partner more with academia to really pursue the cutting edge things that then could be commercialized. So fundamentally, we believe that more needs to be invested in rare disease, top to bottom.
Well, you've got a great collection in the room today of not only scientists, you've got researchers, you've got clinicians, and folks that provide a lot of care. What would you give them as advice coming away from your experience here? What can we learn from that?
Yes, so I think first and foremost, find people like me. They're out there and they're really desperate to connect with you. Some might be intimidated or feeling like, oh, I don't want to bother them. You know, find those people at the medical conferences you go to or the associations that you do. Look for them and try and build a bridge that people like Greg Enns and Mike Snyder did with me and really took me under their wings and trained me by and large. I'd also say that Stanford is really poised to be at the epicenter of this future. And while we all love Stanford, it is not perfect, and there's always room to grow and improve. And oftentimes we hear, well, this is how it's done, you know? And if it was done so well before, we'd have a lot more breakthroughs and cures. So fight that sort of mantra of, well, this is how it's done. You know, push people and challenge it and try and find solutions. And I would say that Stanford is very fortunate. I was saying this to David earlier, is that very, very fortunate to have a president in Mark Tessier-Levine that understands this and comes from a life science perspective. So I would just hope those are the things that you can kind of take away and look for maybe little clues in the most unlikely of situations that can help a broader population.
Well, Matt, thank you for sharing your story, and it is inspiring. If you look at all the work that you and your wife have been able to progress toward, hopefully at someday finding a cure for this dreaded deficiency, we appreciate that and sharing that with us. Would you please join me in giving Matt a great round of applause?
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I have to say, I'm just truly inspired when you look at the work that we do and then the great partnership that we have, and I appreciate that. We now have the wonderful opportunity to talk about what are some of the challenges that are happening within Stanford Medicine. And so I'd like to invite back up to the stage our dean, Lloyd Minor, and then also Leslie Subak. She is our chair of obstetrics and gynecology and has recently joined us. And I have to say, what a treat it is to have her here. Leslie.
Thank you, David. I am so pleased to be here today and to have all of you here with our Stanford Medicine leadership. We often hear that today is the golden age of biomedicine, but what does that really mean for Stanford Medicine? As a preeminent academic institution, we're helping to accelerate discovery, to deliver cutting-edge patient care, and perhaps most importantly, to train the leaders of tomorrow. However, we face some unique challenges. So for the next 30 minutes, we're going to have a discussion about some of the most pressing issues that face Stanford Medicine, as well as the institution's plans for addressing them. And toward that end, and toward the end of the discussion, we'll have an open microphone for questions. So to begin with, the Silicon Valley is a great place to work, but we're going to talk about a familiar issue that faces all of us, affordability. So how is Stanford Medicine addressing the increasing cost of living that all members of our community must grapple with?
I can start.
Silence.
We kind of looked at each other on that one.
Okay. Well, several things, and I do think it's may very well be the biggest challenge we have in the decade moving forward. As you know, the Provost did increase the minimum stipend for postdoctoral fellows to $60,000. We in the School of Medicine provided funds to help mitigate the effects of that increase because postdocs are by and large paid by individual investigators. I think that was a start. Still, $60,000 a year is, in terms of living in the area, is still a big challenge. Our hospitals have stepped up and have helped to increase housing support for our residents and fellows. And on the faculty side, we've first across the university, there is a re-examination of our faculty and staff housing program to look at how it might be modified to better meet the increasing challenges that arise from the environment in which we live. And also we in the School of Medicine are looking at that as well. It is an issue that comes up in almost every recruitment of a faculty member or staff member. And I think it's going to be with us for a while. So we're really coming together as a Stanford family to look at how we can address these challenges. Let me ask David and Denny to talk about some of the wonderful work you're doing on the hospital side as well.
I think part of I love what you brought up. I think one of the challenges is it's an expensive area to live in. It was certainly, having been in the state for a couple of years and trying to find affordable housing is not an easy task in this area. It's one of the things, and we know that people get pushed farther and farther out of the community to find affordable pieces. And so even the little bit of work that we have done to help with some of the resident stipends, I think creates a little bit more of a locus here. But I think we're going to have to work on and do more things. And that's certainly something that we've talked about on a local basis is, are there things that we can do to mitigate or help our employees and faculty and staff, quite frankly, in being able to live closer to where you work. It's great to have free bus passes and free train passes, but it still takes time to get here. And the solutions are certainly in discussions, but not always readily apparent. And so we want to make sure that we know that we're very empathetic for, I think, some of the challenges that we have in front of us, but it's going to take some creative solutions to get there.
I'd agree. I think it is paramount, the most important challenge that we have to maintain our faculty. Gives us challenges for not only recruitment but also retention. I think we're delighted that for the first time ever, both hospitals are able to offer the 80th percentile of payments in the funds flow process. Now, one could argue that to live in San Francisco, you may need the 120th percentile, but it's a great step forward, and I think the hospitals will continue to work with the school to try to take the best care we can of our people.
Fabulous. And I have to say, from the chair end, what you're all doing to help provide increase RVU payments and for us to increase our salaries is really helping us to recruit and to retain people. So a big thanks from the clinical departments. And affordability certainly affects more than simply how we live here and support our community. Healthcare in the Bay Area is notoriously expensive. So how is Stanford Healthcare in particular thinking about affordability as healthcare costs continue to rise?
Maybe let me start with that one. Let me just ask in a general poll of the audience here and show by raise of hands. If I were to ask you that question, is healthcare affordable? If I were to, what would you say? Would you say that healthcare is affordable in this region by show of hands? How many of you would say it's unaffordable? I think if you look at that question, on the surface, the reality is healthcare is expensive. And I have to say, having lived at various different parts of the country, healthcare in the Bay Area is also very expensive. Now, that's not just Stanford Medicine. That's, quite frankly, whether that's Sutter, whether that's Kaiser, whether that's UCSF. Healthcare in this area is expensive. And so it's one of the things that's very challenging. Now, we know who pays, for the most part, the majority of the healthcare services that we have. It's insurance companies. It's the third-party providers if you're employed. If not, in the state, this is the state in California with the highest utilization of a product for those who don't have insurance, and that's Medicaid, in our state called Medi-Cal. In fact, a third of all of the individuals in the state are actually paid through Medi-Cal, through that insurance product. Now, the nice part about Medi-Cal is it covers all your cost. Is that a true statement? You know by the collective chuckle it's not. In fact, if you don't know, Medicare, which is basically for those 65 and above, and Medi-Cal, which is those who can't afford insurance in the state, has created a lot of venues into that. Neither one of those products cover their cost. And how much of those costs actually, or how much of those insurance products do we treat here at Stanford Medicine? Now I'm talking the adult side, not the kids. But we're about 50% of all of our products. So if you have two products that basically don't cover the cost of the care you're providing, then that falls to the outside payers. I bring that up because that's a challenging position to be in, and that's not just here in California, that's around the country. I sit on the board also for the American Hospital Association, which represents 5,000 hospitals nationwide. We went through what were our strategic priority areas last year. The number one on our list is affordability, because the reality is healthcare costs around the country keep going up. Now, we live in a very challenging environment. There's a lot of services that we have to provide. I would say in a hospital is probably one of the most challenging, because if you think about what Stanford Medicine is, we are that quaternary tertiary provider. We provide for the very sickest, so to speak, of the sick. So the challenging aspect of that is when you have more of the primary care pieces that are a little bit maybe easier to do, maybe not quite as expensive to be in, we become an expensive network to do that. Now, the nice part about that is, what have we done about that? Well, we've created a network throughout the Bay Area, and a community network that provides us a lower cost setting to do that. At the same time, we're also putting some of the specialties out into those communities, whether you look at South Bay for the adult hospital, whether you look at Redwood City or even Emeryville. How do we get some of those more distributed in sometimes a much less lower cost environment? But the challenge is we are 24/7. The expectation is that we're here all the time, and that becomes expensive because in essence you have to cover those costs whether there's people here or not. And so it is a very challenging question, but I can say one of the things that I really love that you heard from Lloyd talk about, one of our strategic priority areas is actually called value focused. And if you think of value focused, you probably have a different connotation, different ways that you think about value. Sometimes, I hate to say it, pops up in my mind, Walmart value, because they have that value saver. This is not that value, so forget that comment. The reality is how do we create around our cost the quality of the care that we provide, but also the experience that the patient has at the same time. And so what you're going to see us is working around creating that best experience. I love what Matt talked about, and being able to say, being able to get that diagnosis, being able to have that piece that provides that peace of mind. But at the same time, you think about the expense and costs that go into that. We want to be able to do that. We want to have that highest and greatest resource. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we can create an efficiency of our product so that as people, whether that's insurers, whether that's us as individuals, are able to access that. And I can tell you that's something that we work on constantly. And it's something that does a great, I have to say, there's a great team that's around that. And there's a lot of different pieces that we could talk through. So I'm probably going on longer than Leslie wants, but I wanted to just share a lot of the things that I think make us unique and why Stanford is so special in so many different aspects.
Fabulous, thank you. And I want to transition to something that I'm sure is on everyone's mind as you walk around campus and you see the many cranes that are here. And I often laugh. I came from a nearby academic medical center not long ago, and there the nasty word that you didn't say was money. Here it's space. So let's talk about space for a second. And Denny, this is actually for both of you. What updates do we have on our recently opened children's hospital and soon to be open adult hospital?
Thanks, Leslie. Obviously been a busy year of change at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital this year. In December, we opened a new addition to our hospital that fundamentally triples the clinical size of the space. We've also had a wonderful year in terms of improvement in our outcomes of our quality metrics this year. Now, I would be remiss rather if I didn't mention that this has also been a year of leadership transition at Packard. We've essentially had one CEO for 21 years who's just recently retired. And so there's a lot of change going on at Packard. But despite that, We have raised the bar in the quality and outcome metrics at Packard incredibly in the past year, and that is truly due to our provider team. We have brought on 149 new beds, but when we finish the renovations of our west building, we will net out about 100 total new beds. And as those of you who have had babies at Packard, like Matt and his wife, they know that you're not always in a private room. Well, it would really actually be quite nice to have a private room if you're having a baby. So that's our goal to get there. And eventually, when we have all of our renovations done, we'll have 361 beds at Packard, which again is not a particularly large children's hospital when you think of particularly a hospital that also has obstetrics. In July, we opened our new operating rooms, 6 new operating rooms, plus 4 procedural areas. Again, really making it possible for children to now share in the absolute best in technology. And the goal of doing that is not really to create the Starship Enterprise, which is one of my favorite metaphors. It's really actually to save children exposure to anesthesia, exposure to radiation, and shorten procedures and achieve better outcomes in the hospital. And I think our new facility is going to do that. One of the luxuries it's afforded us is actually we were always full, and now we are not always full. And so we actually can really begin to start revving up our efforts to allow children who in previous circumstances couldn't come to Packard now to be able to come to Packard. And so we're very excited to be starting some of that work. And I suspect that David and his team are going to be doing similar type of work as they get close to opening their new facility.
You are correct. I remember when I was getting recruited, which was probably almost about 3 years ago, they were on a rolling horizon that when would the new hospital at 500 be open? And the kind of standard answer was 2 years. I even answered last year because I got asked in an event we're doing tonight. In fact, the very same time last year in a public forum, they said, when's the hospital going to open? I said, 2 years. So we were kind of keeping that theme. Let me tell you here today, it's 14 months. Yay! I have to say, we are extremely excited. I do see Bert over here, who's our Vice President for Facilities and Construction. Can you give me a head nod that that's still 14 months? Okay. The wave is it. Good. I have to tell you how excited. When I was getting recruited here and talking about this hospital, this is really exciting. When you think about the resource this will be for the community, our patients, the collection of data for research, the training of our residents, I mean, all the different pieces that this new hospital will give. In fact, I love in some of the things when I go out and talk about the new hospital and giving updates on what's neat about Stanford and all the things that we're doing, I say this will be the most technologically sophisticated hospital in the world. And so it's interesting when I'm with my colleagues from Mayo and Hopkins and everywhere else, nobody refutes that, which I thought was kind of good because, in fact, one of the folks that got up after me at one of the recent board meetings says, we're building the second most sophisticated hospital. So I thought, great. So I said, well, if I'm going to keep saying this, I probably ought to understand what that is. And so I spent about 4 hours going through the building, just seeing some of the technology that we have in this facility is absolutely amazing. In fact, in the OR areas, one of the things that's exciting, we'll actually have 3 acres of operating room space. So whenever the surgeons say there's not enough space, we'll be able to say there's 3 acres, there's 20 new operating rooms, and in fact, 8 new interventional suites where we take technology and basically couple with what our surgeons will be doing. And so this is an exciting space. It's a wonderful opportunity. As Denny said, you never kind of want to make a friend when you're in the hospital, and so having double occupancy rooms are tough. This will take us to all single occupancy when we go back into the existing space, which is 300p, and actually also remodel that space and create single occupancy rooms there as well. So there's some exciting things for our patients, for physicians, for those that are working in the building as we think about this new building. And I think it's an important part of what Stanford is, back to the resources that we have. Now, I will also say that come September of next year, we're also going to have 2 weeks of opening events. And so one of the exciting parts about that is we'll have several days that are actually open forums for us as Stanford Medicine individuals, employees, to go over and see the new building before it opens. And so please take the opportunity to do that and come see what the new building will be and all of what it has to offer. It's an exciting time.
Fabulous. And I have to say, Packard is spectacular, and having gone on hard hat tours of 500P, as soon as you can, try to get over and see each of the buildings. It's absolutely amazing. Certainly will help us continue to provide and even maybe provide more extraordinary clinical care. And then Dean Minor, how is Stanford Medicine addressing the increasing constraints on campus space for our faculty and staff?
Well, you said it very well, and that is space is our biggest problem, particularly research space, and within the domain of research space, particularly wet lab space. You've all seen the building on Pasture Drive that is now coming out of the ground in steel, and that's going to be a wonderful new, roughly 200,000 square foot building, which we call the Biomedical Innovation Building. It will be completed in 2020. As well as if you've driven recently on Quarry Road, you see an area just across from the Stanford barn there that is now encased in fencing, and there's a very deep hole being dug for 3 levels of underground parking, and that will be a center for academic medicine. So the Biomedical Innovation Building is wet lab space. The Center for Academic Medicine will be for offices for our faculty, as well as for our clinical trials coordinators and the infrastructure we have around clinical trials and some other so-called dry related research. It too is around 200,000 square feet and will come online in 2020. Now that's the good news about on-campus construction. The challenging news is that most of that space in both of those buildings, roughly 70% of the new space that we're constructing, will be used to move people out of Grant Lane, Allway, and Edwards. And that just has to be done, as painful as it is. And I can speak to the pain because I've been deeply involved in raising the money for those buildings. And we have to get out of Grant Lane, Allway, Edwards for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the seismic related reasons. And so these 2 buildings are absolutely critical to us in that transition out of Grant Lane, Allway, Edwards. We're also will be opening new space in the Stanford Research Park, just off of Page Mill Road. We have leased the building that is at the address of 1701 Page Mill Road. That is what was formerly the Theranos headquarters. So we have acquired that lease, and we'll be renovating the building in order to house wet lab researchers, as well as some associated computational research with those wet lab researchers. And we're looking at other opportunities in that complex on Page Mill Road and Porter Drive, the perpendicular road that extends off of Page Mill Road. We recognize that, no matter what metric we look at, research dollars per square foot of research space, productivity of individual faculty members, no matter what metric we choose, our faculty are incredibly productive given the space constraints under which all of our faculty operate. We're committed, I'm committed, all of us are committed to getting us into a better place. These first 2 buildings on campus are a firm step in that direction. Expansion in the research park will also be a help. But ultimately, there is a longer range plan associated with the general use permit that's being discussed now with Santa Clara County that will provide us, if approved, when approved, the opportunity to continue to work on our on-campus related opportunities. And we're exploring near sites at a variety of different areas not on campus and not in the research park. It's something we spend a lot of time on. I want to thank the faculty and the staff who consistently are working, getting a lot done with very little in terms of space. And I think it's a credit to the creativity and innovation of our faculty that we're able to keep our research mission moving forward, even under these challenging conditions.
Terrific, thank you. And David, for you, there's been a lot of talk recently about the upcoming ballot initiatives in November. Can you please unpack for all of us what that means and why it's important?
Yeah, so how many of you have heard of Prop F, or also Measure U, which is Livermore? So you have to say those carefully. We say Measure F and then Measure U, so we don't say those together. You know what that means. This is very challenging to us, and let me just be very frank about the conversation here. We had a wonderful opportunity to go through a negotiation with our union last year, SEIU UHW, which is basically behind these two initiatives. One of the things that they asked for in that negotiation, which wasn't agreed to by our employees, is the question of neutrality, which would allow the union more ready access to be able to organize other units within the hospital, both the children's hospital and the adult hospital, into their bargaining unit. Certainly that's a strategy for unions. They'd like to grow their membership. We felt as though that conversation should be an open dialogue, not from a neutral standpoint. And so we didn't agree to that. The members didn't agree to that. Their members are our employees. And so we finalized our bargain. Unfortunately, after that, there began to run a series of ads on the radio that you may have heard that actually disparaged the quality of our organization. Those went on for a little bit of time. The challenging part of that is what's funding those is actually, quite frankly, the dues of our employees, which is a little bit challenging. And then they have now run two ballot initiatives, both of which are on the ballot for both Palo Alto and Livermore. This is a strategy that's used across the state by this union and other venues, and so this isn't a new strategy. Now, what does this mean for us? What the ballot initiative says is it defines what cost of health care can be. And so if I was to see this on the surface and say, oh, this is great, it'll lower the cost of health care, the reality is it doesn't lower the cost of health care. What it does is define what can be reimbursed through health care. And therefore, if this ballot initiative passed, it would define what we could, in fact, get reimbursed for. Not what we charge, not what we're doing currently. What it would require is basically we would have to follow a formula that was defined by the initiative that takes a lot of what we do out as uncompensatable. Therefore, we would have to rebate back to the insurance companies the amount of money that they paid over what this defined piece was. If this isn't confusing enough for you, it is for me. I know it's taken a while to go through this. Therefore, that's why we are firmly against the ballot initiative F and the ballot initiative U, so that these are not passed, because that would create a real challenge for us internally of just being able to be reimbursed for our cost. We don't feel as though these monies need to go back to the insurance companies, because I don't know how often you've ever got a rebate back from your insurance company for paying them too much for your insurance. I haven't, so I don't anticipate we would get that money back long term. I will also say that both the City of Livermore, the city councils, have voted unanimously, and I have yet to see the Palo Alto City Council be unanimous on anything, but they voted unanimously 9-0 to oppose this. So it's certainly something that's challenging that we're dealing with, and we certainly see that what we have, and certainly a case to not proceed forward with that, is very resolute. But I just wanted to have a little bit of background on what that awareness is, so I appreciate that question.
Thank you very much. And we'll encourage all of you to get out and vote November 6th, and if you happen to be in the Palo Alto area, even better. So I would like to ask two more questions, but with maybe brief answers, so we have just a minute for extra questions from the audience. And the first is on support for basic science. We have such a rich history at Stanford of discovery. In fact, we have 7 Nobel laureates among our very large and prestigious basic science faculty. What are we doing now to ensure that we continue to build upon this legacy? And how are we enabling our researchers to make the discoveries that define the future of patient care?
Thank you. No, certainly I'll start. I agree with everything you said. The basic science discovery enterprise here is incredible. It has contributed in so many ways to all biomedical advances over the past 50 years, starting with recombinant DNA. The birthplace of biotechnology was right here at Stanford with the Cohen-Boyer patent, and so many others. And making sure that 20, 30, 40 years from now, our successors can make the same statement. That is, they can claim that this is the epicenter of biomedical discovery in the world. Making sure that that will be the case is an important responsibility, I think, for those of us here today. What are we doing about it? A number of things. One is with our magnificent colleagues in Medical Center Development and the Office of Development of Stanford University, we've been successful at taking this message to our donors, this message of the importance of fundamental research. Just to mention one example, we've raised north of $36 million to support the first 4 years of PhD education so that no PhD student has to go on the grant of his or her principal investigator until after the 4th year. There are a number of other things too, discovery, innovation funds, endowed professorships, but it's a strong commitment on behalf of all of us here to make sure that we maintain a vibrant and world-class leading discovery engine here at Stanford.
Great, thank you. And just a last question. We've really seen a concerted effort in making Stanford Medicine a more diverse and inclusive community. And Dean Minor, why is this a priority, and what are you most proud of related to diversity and inclusion?
Well, it certainly takes a village, and I'm very pleased to work closely with David and Denny and our respective leadership teams on making this vision and this, I would say, ethical and moral responsibility a reality. It's reflected in our recruiting. I'm really pleased that today both our MD and our PhD programs, classes, have roughly double the representation from groups underrepresented in medicine as compared to 6 years ago. That's been a concerted effort due to a concerted effort on the part of a lot of people, on the admissions staff, on the faculty. And we're bringing in every year roughly 90 new medical students, 115 or so new PhD students. So that's a place where we can have impact relatively quickly. On the faculty side, we're working through the chairs we recruit, the clinical department chairs, other faculty leaders to make sure that we reflect our aspirations, and that is that we reflect leaders who come from diverse backgrounds, and that we're constantly, as a leadership team, promoting inclusion among our community. And very importantly, and I want to turn it over to David and Denny to make remarks, because I think on the staff and on the leadership side in our hospitals, those values are being reflected every day. And I see it every day as I walk through our hospitals in the diversity of our staff in the hospitals, and the fact that at the leadership level, we have practiced what we preached in terms of making sure that we have a respectful workplace environment, and that we, each of us as leaders, embody inclusion in the way we're interacting with people and in the way we're leading.
You know, one quick thought. Sometimes the currency, so to speak, of leadership is what we give attention to. And I think what I would just emphasize on what Lloyd has said is the reality is we had our board meeting last week, and each one of the department chairs had the opportunity to get up and give a 2-minute update on what was happening. And Leslie, you were a great example of this, but also as you looked at the chairs that went around, the perspectives that they brought on what they were proud of is the inclusion and diversity that they had been able to recruit into their departments. And it's great to see not only that voice, but also what's actually in action and getting it done.
No, I think it's wonderful, and at Packard we obviously support this initiative. We're very fortunate in the world of pediatrics is that actually more women and underrepresented minorities are attracted to pediatrics as a specialty. So our job tends to be a little bit easier, but we clearly want to keep it top of mind across the entire organization.
Well, Thank you all. I did say we'd try to open it for questions, but I know we're at the end of our time, and I apologize for that. But I think the answers you gave and the questions we asked were actually really informative. I would encourage anyone to email or grab Lloyd, David, Denny. They may not encourage this, but I'd say grab them and ask them, because they're all very open and very receptive. And your leadership of Stanford Medicine has just been tremendous. So thank you all very much. And and I know, and Dr. Minor is and Dean Minor is going to give us an update on precision health at Stanford. I know we have about 5 or 6 minutes left.
Sure. I know there's some people that may need to leave, and please go ahead and do so. But let's go directly to the video. Our team prepared a wonderful video giving an overview of precision health, and maybe we can finish up by viewing that video, and then we'll be around for a few minutes for those of you that might have questions. And we do always welcome your feedback. Thanks again for being here, and here's the video.
At Stanford Medicine, with our vision of precision health, we have the ability to touch billions of lives by 2025. Through a variety of precision health activities, we're already well on our way. Through the power of biomedical data science, advanced technologies and services, and truly patient-centered care. Stanford Medicine physicians have been instrumental in bringing India's emergency services system to life, training the country's core of paramedics and designing emergency protocols. The scale of this effort is vast, reaching 800 million across various states in India. In 2017, GVK EMRI, the emergency service provider, saw 1,000 patients per hour. That's about 1 patient every 3.5 seconds. We're currently in conversations to expand in India and into Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bhutan, Myanmar, and Cambodia. At the Asian Liver Center, we worked with the Chinese government to offer free hepatitis B vaccinations. In 2017 alone, our perinatal hepatitis B prevention projects reached 450,000 pregnant women. The Prakash Lab is developing novel engineering solutions to complex health problems. With their research, just 1 second of recording the sound of a mosquito can identify potentially disease-carrying species of mosquitoes from around the world. We're making a difference. In addition, over the past 10 years, Stanford Biodesign in India has helped train the first generation of more than 130 health technology innovators locally. Spark Global has established a network of like-minded scientists that can be recruited quickly to address global health challenges when they arise. Programs are beginning in 16 countries, but the road to 2 billion doesn't stop there. We've also created the Digital Medical Education International Collaborative, or Digital Medic, further transform the landscape of digital training and modernize global medical education. Our online medical initiatives like Digital Medic now total 18 courses, 500 lessons, educating and empowering 300,000 learners worldwide. And it's all available to anyone because we understand that online medical education can revolutionize healthcare. At our Center for Innovation in Global Health, we facilitate global discovery and research, create opportunities integrating real-world experience in teaching and learning, and work to build a community of people dedicated to helping heal humanity at a global scale. With these and many more precision health activities, we're on track to reach 2 billion people. And we're just getting started.
All right, and you are the people that make that happen every day. So we thank you all for being here today. We look forward to staying in touch and to a really exciting year ahead. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.